Get rid of that. Welcome, everybody. Glad to see you all here today, and what a perfect way to get together on a yucky day. But the gardening is not that far off. I know I've been putzing around in my garden a little bit already, so you know, we are getting ready to go here. Okay, where's my? There we are. Okay. I realized after the little lectures we did last year, I should probably throw an extra slide in. I'm sure I'm speaking to the choir for some of you, some maybe not as much, but I want to explain why we're doing this series of lectures, why we're focused on natives, and what exactly we mean. So a native plant means that it occurs here naturally. There was no intervention. It wasn't brought here. It's been here since way before us. And why exactly are we encouraging you to plant them? Well, of course, since they belong here, since they've been here for, you know, who knows how many millennia, they're adapted to these conditions. They need less water, they need less of your care. But in addition to that, it's more than that. I hope you will think about embracing the whole wildlife habitat idea, that not only are they beautiful, but they're useful to the insects, and then to the birds, and to all the other wildlife around here. There are relationships between some of these native plants, or many of them, and insects, which are required. These insects will only lay their eggs on certain plants. They'll only eat certain plants. And the insects provide the main food for most of our birds as they're raising young. And then, of course, it looks like it belongs here, right? It looks like Texas. So anyway, that's why we're doing what we're doing. Come on. Okay, so this is what I plan to cover, and just kind of touching really briefly on these ideas, you know, what exactly we're typically doing at this time of year. So it's a good time to start trimming and preparing for spring. I'm going to talk a little bit about cuttings. If you're going to trim anyway and you want some more plants, it's a good time to do that. Get rid of things that you're not wanting, maybe protect some of your plants, and maybe get some new plants in. So I'm going to touch on all of those. Hello. And again, please don't hesitate to interrupt me and ask questions. So this is my backyard, and you can see most of what you see right out there is Zexmania. And I do leave it during the winter. It's important wildlife habitat. It's good places for wildlife to hide. So I leave it through the winter. But as we go into February, and I can see that there's new growth coming up at the ground level, then it's time to start trimming away some of that last year's growth and tidy up. But that's what my yard looks like during the winter. Also, it's a great time to collect up any last seeds if you didn't do that last fall. It might not be the best time of year to spread those seeds, so you might want to hang on to them. But anyway, notice there's still a lot of seed heads on those Zexmania. It's also a perfect time to share them with friends, right? Do a little trading around. But I decided to take some pictures of a few plants as I cut them back, just to kind of give you an idea of what I'm doing. So notice my Mealy blue sage over here is quite, overgrown. that's last year's growth that's very dead, but you can see that there's new growth coming up at the bottom. So I trim all that old growth away, and I could probably even have trimmed it down lower, but now it exposes all that new growth and we're ready to go for the spring. And that is a wonderful plant if you've got a lot of sun, which a lot of us do, and are fighting deer, which a lot of us are. Autumn sage, so another one of my sages. I don't tend to trim that as much. I just get some of the dead stuff off, because I may do it again in the summertime just to make it look tidier. If you notice, that's mostly what I did there, was just kind of tidy it up and get some of the dead branches out of there, because it's already starting to green up when I did it. My rock rose, I love this plant, and I brought it to this property in a little pot, and it's just gone happy crazy, but it tends to grow kind of flat after a while and get kind of leggy and spindly. So in the spring, I cut a lot of that away. In fact, I kept cutting after this, and get it back up off the sidewalk, get it a little bit more tidy so it will grow a little bit more as a shrub rather than this kind of prostrate sort of leggy thing. But like I was saying, if you're going to do a lot of trimming and you would like to have any more plants, or you would like to be able to give some plants away, you can take advantage of some of these cuttings, and rock rose is one that I have had success with, keeping some of the cuttings. So there's my pile of cuttings that looked pretty healthy. And because of Native Plant Society, which I'm a member of, and the plant sale that we do, I do like to have material to sell at the plant sale too. But I thought I'd go through what I have done in the past to try to get some of this rooted and ready to go. I do like this little rooting hormone. You don't have to buy that particular brand, but you know, these are cuttings. They have no roots on them. You're going to have to help them get started. So here's some of my cuttings. I trimmed them down to a fairly small size. Notice I also cut the end of that twig at an angle so that there's a little bit more surface area. I dip it in my rooting hormone, tap most of it off, and then it is ready to plant. So I tend to, rather than use a lot of teeny tiny pots, which I feel I have a hard time keeping wet. I usually use the gallon size pots, which for some reason I always have a lot of anyway. And I put a number of them in there, and then I watch to see which ones look healthy and which ones seem to be taking off. And then I'll pot them up separately later on. But that's just kind of my nursery, right, of rock rose for last year. And a good share of them did survive. And I think I brought, at least 8 or 10, I think, to our plant sale and gave a few away. So I had quite a few after this. But just something to consider rather than just bundling up all those trimmings and putting them in a compost pile. It's also a good time for weeding. So the great thing about wildflowers, native flowers, is that they're going to come back. The downside is, because they belong here and they're happy here, they may come up in places where you didn't really want to have them. So as they're getting started and you can see things, you know, once you've trimmed back, so you might want to do some trimming first, but it's a good time to get some of those other plants out of there that you didn't want there. And again, perfect for trading, perfect for, giving away, but you may not want that same plant everywhere, and you may not want it to come up in some grassy places or whatever. So it's a good time to do a little tidying up and get some plants out of places you didn't want them. I always feel like I need to talk for just a minute about mulching. I'm not a big advocate of mulching. I'll tell you that from the start. I do little bits where I think it's warranted. It can help keep some moisture in the ground, but you have to be careful about putting too much mulch down. If you put more than 4 inches, and I would even modify that and say more than 2 or 3 inches, first of all, you know that a lot of our rains are more like a 1/4 inch, sometimes more like 1/10 of an inch, right? And the water is not even getting through all that mulch. If you stuck your finger down in your garden beneath all that mulch, you'd probably find that the ground is dry. So now you're not really helping your plants by putting all that mulch down. And I hope you know that this is something you should never do. Never, never, never do. First of all, this is not where a tree needs mulch. Okay? A tree needs mulch way out where the roots are, way, way out to the sides, which is not where people usually want to put mulch, right? Because you've got a lawn there potentially. But this is something that could potentially kill this tree. It's a place for insects to get into that tree. It's a place for fungi to grow because it's damp all the time. It's great for rodents to find their way in and damage the tree. And you could be promoting the growth of roots into the mound of mulch rather than into the ground. It really doesn't serve any great purpose. And that crazy mulch volcano that people love to do, where actually a moat, also doesn't really serve any purpose. I don't know why people think that up close to the trunk of the tree is where the tree needs water. It's not. It needs water out where all those roots are, unless you have a teeny tiny new tree. But again, that's just a lot of mulch, and I don't think it's helpful. Sometimes I put a little bit down. I don't like the chipped wood kind of mulch, because to me it doesn't look natural around my home. I tend to use decomposed granite a bit more. But again, I use it kind of sparingly, just to make areas maybe look a little tidier. This is also a good time of year while it's still cool to get some plants in, or to start thinking about putting plants in. It's still a good time to put some trees in, although that time is going to be soon past, but it's still okay time right now to put trees in. But you might have lost plants because they've aged out. We're having some extreme weather again. Who knows what it's going to look like next week. So this is a good opportunity to add to your beds, to replace plants. And this is one of the points I've been trying to make more often lately. This one here. This is you don't need to remove all your non-natives from a garden if you have some. Think about removing them as they die and replacing those with something that's native. So don't feel like you have to dig up your entire flower bed, to try to replace it with natives. Just add the natives as you can. It can be an ongoing process. Okay, so I thought I'd spend a little time on making suggestions about how you might choose your plants. And of course, you have to think about what kind of finished look do you want? You know, how do you want it to look like a traditional garden? Do you want it to look very um, arid or xeriscaped? You know, what exactly are you looking for? So think about what exactly you're trying to accomplish. All of these are beautiful, right, in their own way. And some couple of the pictures I think were from Austin, but not too far away. And you might want to think about what your goal is. Are you trying to bring birds in? So do you want some good nesting sites, you know, which means you probably want different levels of plants in your landscape, you know, some smaller plants, maybe some shrubby size, and even some small tree and large tree size, so that you can accommodate all of that. Do you like to watch hummingbirds? Well, then you want at least some flowers that are kind of tube shaped, which is what they're going to like. Do you like to watch butterflies? Then you might want to look at what kind of plants make good nectar plants for butterflies. But as I was mentioning earlier, also think about which ones are good as host plants too. If you've got the space, if you can choose some plants carefully, you could be providing some places for these butterflies to lay their eggs, and plants that the caterpillars can feed on. Now, I know a lot of people get nervous about welcoming insects into their garden, that, oh, the insects are going to decimate my garden. I'm not going to have any flowers. And oddly enough, that's not typically true. They will eat some. And I guess the goal is to make sure you don't just plant one of something. Plant a few, right? Plant groupings of the plants that you like, because the amount that gets eaten will really not be that noticeable. One, yes, might be noticeable. So I thought I'd share with you some of the resources that we provide to the community. We have a program called the NICE program, which stands for Natives Improve and Conserve Environments. And you can find that program on our website, the Lindheimer website. We also partner with some nurseries around here to try to encourage them to sell natives. It's not always that easy to find them, especially if you're going to places like Lowe's, HEB, Home Depot, you know, they're not that easy to find. So you have to do a little bit extra looking to find good nurseries with good native plants. So the ones that we partner with personally, Canyon Lake Ace Hardware, they're great folks. They have someone new in the greenhouse area, in the plant area, but he seems very enthusiastic. South Texas Growers, which is closer to where I'm at, over here on 46. And again, it helps to go in and chat with people and go in with kind of a strong idea of what you're looking for. You might even have to go with actual scientific names with you in some cases. Spring Creek Gardens is a newer partner. They don't have a whole lot of natives yet. They're trying to develop themselves. And so I don't know exactly what direction they're going, but they have some. And then King Feed has recently opened a new location at Canyon Lake. There's also one up in Wimberley, also a great location too. But those are places where you could expect to go in and find good native plants. And I can share this information with Bethany if she wants to share this out with you. But you can also find this on our website. So that's a good place to go. Okay, where's my, there you are. We didn't have our whole poster finished yet for this year, but if you go to our website, this is what you'll find right now is our 2022 nice list. Soon it will have pictures and it will be in poster form because it goes out to our partner nurseries. But what we have done is choose 4 plants for each of the main planting seasons. We combine fall and winter that we are recommending this year and that we think you can find at the local nurseries. So again, this list is also currently on our website. There's a picture on there that says nice, and if you click on it, you will find this list, and it will be replaced soon with a poster version that has pictures. Okay, so that's a good reference. These are also good reference tools. I haven't seen a new version of the garden style, but they sometimes have some good plants in there. I'm assuming you can find it online as well at gardenstylesa.com. And they try to indicate whether it's good for butterflies, bees, birds. But the Grow Green book that comes out of Austin, Texas is a great book. I have found that you can find this online now. We typically sell it when we have events, but we haven't had as many events lately. I was going to bring some if we were meeting in person today, but you can find it on online as well. So it's got good pictures, good suggestions about where to put the plants, whether or not it's a native of the Edwards Plateau or the Blackland Prairie, or both, or whether it's just an adapted plant that works well here, but not necessarily from this part of Texas. Okay, so I really like the Grow Green book. I think that's a really good one. Okay, so I made up my own, just kind of few slides of some plants that I like to recommend that I think do well in different areas. So if you're thinking about the lower plants, the ground cover kind of plants, these are all great native plants. Cedar sage, which grows in the shade under cedar trees, hence the name, is a great, beautiful red plant. The prairie verbena, which can kind of take some shade or sun. It's a little bit more flexible and blooms through a lot of the year, is a wonderfully beautiful plant. Let's see, columbine, also beautiful, not terribly tall and works well in the shade. And the skullcap, which again kind of is flexible. The heartleaf likes a bit more shade. Also nice in your shady areas, because a lot of us don't have huge amounts of shady areas. We're trying to get plants to grow out in those really sunny spots, which we do have some great plants that are well adapted to our sunny spots. So I'll get to that in a minute. If you want something shrubbier in your shadier spots, Turk's cap, which is pretty easy to find, does very well in both sun and shade. the amount of blooming will vary a little bit depending on where you put it, but it will tolerate some shade. Same with rock rose. It will tolerate some shade. In the sun, you're going to have to give it a little extra water, but it will work in either area. But those are great shrubs for your areas that have some shade. Now, most of us deal with sun, right? If you're looking for the lower plants that do well in your sunny areas, Blackfoot daisy is one of my personal favorites. It can be a little funny. It likes to be where it likes to be. And so sometimes you've chosen wrong with it. But boy, once you get it established, it is the happiest plant. And it looks so beautiful in rocky places. This is Callilophus, which is a primrose. Very pretty plant, and actually a lot hardier than it looks. Coreopsis, so a pretty daisy that makes a good ground cover. And also Gora, which is a little bit on the taller side for ground cover, but does so well in the sun. It's just beautiful. Has a very airy, almost feathery kind of look to it, but very, very hardy. Also, here's a couple more. This is green thread. I really like green thread. That just blooms and blooms and blooms. It does so well. Oops, sorry. Didn't mean to go forward. Coneflower, which you've probably all seen around here, grows pretty much everywhere. Blanket flower, I see kind of sporadically around this area, so I haven't played around a lot with it because I don't see it as much where I'm at. And then here's a couple more of my personal favorites. If you have a rocky spot, to me, nothing looks more beautiful than Demianita. In fact, you can pair it very nicely with Blackfoot daisy, and then you've got some white and some yellow, and it's just gorgeous. And this stuff is hardy and shrubby looking and just beautiful. Also smells pretty. Texas fall aster, which isn't going to bloom typically until later in the year, or although it can put on a couple blooms. That makes a pretty mounding shrub. Greg's Mist, boy, if you're looking for something to bring in the butterflies, Greg's Mist is a favorite. I don't know what there is about it, but the butterflies do really flock to it. And then this is Blazing Star or Liatris, which notice it looks nice in little clumps. Has a very interesting appearance. So these are a little bit on the shrubbier side. Oops, sorry. There we go. Yeah. Okay. Also, some other shrubby things. This is that Mealy blue sage that I was talking about earlier. That's another one. Super easy to grow. Butterflies, hummingbirds like it. It spreads well. It loves the sun. Just does so well. This is autumn sage, which doesn't bloom quite as long. Let's see, Zexmenia. That's a wonderful shrubby plant, and it will do really well. But if you remember back to one of my first pictures, where you have a little bit of Zexmenia, you're likely to have a lot soon. It spreads really, really well. And standing cypress, beautiful plant. Now, the only thing about standing cypress is that it's a biennial. So the first year you're going to have beautiful foliage. The second year it will bloom. So if you really like to have standing cypress, you might want to put some seed down or put some plants in the ground one year and then do it again the next year, so that you always have some that is getting ready to flower. It is every other year. Okay. That is all the slides that I have. I'm happy to go back to anything, but I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions. I see there's a couple in the chat. Bethany, if you want to share what.
Sure. I think they were more comments than questions.
Okay, just
But
comments. Okay.
one is, I have been very successful growing rock rose from seed.
Okay.
And then, oops, I lost my chat a second. The second one was in regards to a caution. I have purchased many natives from South Texas growers. Once a plant was labeled as native and it was not. So you need to know your natives before going. The percentage marked incorrectly is very low though.
Yes. And I have gone there and found that I really needed to have that scientific name with me. Believe it or not, the one that caused confusion, I was looking for what most of us call cenizo, purple sage. And they didn't have it labeled that way. They weren't using that common name. So I was getting very puzzled looks from the staff. And so I happened to have my Grow Green book with me, thank goodness. Opened it up and said, okay, I'm looking for leucophyllum. Oh, right here. So sometimes it's really useful. And there's certain plants you have to be careful about, because there's natives and there's very similar cultivars like our lantanas. And I'm learning that you can't go by just color on the lantana. We'd been told for quite a while that, if it had the orange with the yellow center, it was the native lantana. That's not necessarily true. You have to look at the leaves, apparently. The non-native lantanas, the leaves have lots of teeth along the edge. Like you can count up to about 20 little teeth. But the native lantana only has 8. So you actually have to look at the leaves, the color of the flower. There's been too many cultivars created, I guess, too much hybridization. You can't rely on that. So it does help to go with an actual idea of what you want, and sometimes specific scientific names if you really want to get what you want. Now I have Susan Bogle with me as well. She's been managing a number of different gardens for a while. If you've ever been up to 8 teeth per side, I just happened to see that one pop up. It's 8 teeth per side on the leaf. So if you've ever been up to Ty Preston Library, there's a lovely butterfly garden there that she's been managing for quite a while. Her and I have worked together on a wonderful habiscape garden out at Guadalupe River State Park. And she's part of a new initiative to put in a pollinator garden up at Madrone Trail. So she's also a perfect person to be directing questions to, and she's with me as well. Yes, so native plant sales are a great place to find good and interesting plants, and we try very hard to make sure we're selling natives. We will, our chapter of Native Plant Society will be at Folk Fest, April 9th and 10th over in New Braunfels. I don't know for sure, but I would suspect that the New Braunfels chapter of Native Plant Society will be at Earth Day at Headwaters. They were last year. I would think they would take advantage of that location. Yeah, so watch watch for advertisements about native plant sales. We try really hard to make sure we're selling what's truly native.
Debbie, this is Susan.
Yes.
I'd like to say that actually those native plant sales are the best place to truly get what you're looking for, because they are so careful about that. But you can't really fault the nurseries oftentimes. They receive it from the grower, and the grower may have mislabeled it, and they may not be able to tell that difference to change that name. So sometimes it starts before it gets to the nursery. And I think that's one of the good things about South Texas growers, because, and that's why you see such a low percentage of error there, because they grow a lot of their own, don't they, Debbie?
I think they do, but they don't necessarily grow right near us. So they're using a, you know, it's a little bit of a microclimate that's can be different from where we are. I have been told. And you know, none of us, I don't think any of us would have really thought so much about this whole microclimate or specific ecoregion idea until last year, right? That big freeze last year was a huge eye opener. You know, I've got plants around my property, I'll be the first to admit, that are Texas natives, but not necessarily this local area kind of natives. And they didn't fare as well. You know, look at how many people lost century plants. I lost a big giant one. And I think they're wonderful, but they're really high desert plants. They're not really this local area kind of plant. They're Texas natives, yes, but not hill country or blackland prairie natives. So you just have to, you at least have to keep that in mind. I'm not saying never grow them, but keep that in mind. And plants that are Texas natives, but not native to maybe your local microclimate area, you may have to choose where you put them a little more carefully just because of that. And yeah, Lisa Berry confirmed, yeah, New Braunfels chapter is doing the plant sale April 23rd at Headwaters for Earth Day. I was pretty certain they were. So also great opportunities for getting good native plants. And we do try to put the scientific name on there too, so you can double check.
And Debbie, that kind of reminds me about that Grow Green book. This is Susan again. Just to not warn everybody, but just bring it to their attention. You touched on it, but I'd like to stress that it is not totally native. It's got plants that work in that area, native or not, but it's heavily native. So if anybody has that book, make special note, because it's got great information in there, whether or not it's deer resistant, what kind of light, water, et cetera, et cetera. But be sure to notice whether or not it's native. And I'm a member of Native Plant Society also, and I really want to stress, go native if you can, because it just makes your life so much easier, and it's so much better for the wildlife, the insects, et cetera, if they have their native plants available, as opposed to having to adjust to a cultivar. But just be careful in using that Grow Green book and make sure you make note of what's native and not native.
Yes. Yeah, it does have a very specific column that indicates whether it's Edwards Plateau, Blackland Prairie. I think it's got a code for Texas native, and then some of them are left blank because they're none of those. They're adapted to this area, but not any of those. So.
We have another chat question, Debbie or Susan, either one of y'all. Do you have a recommendation for a medium to large tree that will provide a good screen if planted in a row? And also attached to that, what do you think of any type of cypress?
So if you're talking about like bald cypress, that needs a lot of water. That's a river edge kind of tree. Susan, what do you think about medium to large trees?
Well, my mind immediately went to mountain laurel.
Yeah.
But it's a slow grower. And do you really call it a tree? It's a small tree, large shrub.
it's very thick though. It's got
Yes, for
it would make a good screen.
to blind it, and also it doesn't drop its leaves, because so many times we get into situations where it's great for 9 months out of the year, but you have 3 months when it drops its leaves, and it opens things up for you.
And
So
yeah, I agree. I feel like once you get into a large tree, you're going to end up with so much trunk that it's not really a screen. To me, small to medium trees make better screens. You know, or shrubs, whatever, small to, you know, large shrubs. The good old cenizo, purple sage, whatever, people use it all the time as essentially a hedgerow. That'll work.
yeah, depending on where it is, the
Mhm,
better selection might be exactly what you just said. Look at the larger shrubs,
mhm,
and especially if they're evergreen. You also have to consider when you're looking at these things, how quickly do they grow? Because, for example, sumacs, evergreen sumac might be a good choice, but it's a
mhm,
slow grower.
mhm.
So it may not suit your needs depending on how long you intend to be in that situation.
Right. Prairie sumac might be a good choice, but I don't consider it much of a screen necessarily. A little, it can be kind of open, but anyway, that one grows a little faster.
Yeah, everything I'm
Those
thinking
are
of is deciduous, and it's,
I
that
know
means in winter you're kind of
your
stuck.
screen is gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that
Somebody
makes it
had
tougher.
recommended the Arizona cypress, and that's why I was asking.
Arizona cypress, I'm
I
not
know it's,
sure what
I don't
that
think it's
is.
native here, but
I'm not familiar with that.
I'm not either.
While Debbie's looking that up, let me offer this as a suggestion. You can go to the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower site. Great resource. Go right over to the native plant little icon, and on there you can do plant lists. And in that plant list, you have the option of saying what kind of soil, blackland prairie, or wherever you are, height. You put these parameters in there. You say you want to look at trees, you want them to be a certain height, whether or not you want them deciduous or evergreen, etc. And then it'll pick up every native that falls within that category. And just as a process of elimination, that might be a good option. And think of something that not coming immediately to our minds.
okay. All right. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do see that this is North American, native to southwestern US and Mexico. So it might do fine here. I've never had any experience with Arizona cypress. So oh, big, goodness. That's a big tree.
I'm
I
not
don't
familiar
know
with it.
how-
I'm not familiar with it either, Debbie.
Yeah.
So I'd have to, matter of fact, I'm going to look that up after we get off.
Yeah, it looks like a pretty large tree. Very nice conical tree. I've never seen anybody, it's not something I could say that I've seen people growing around here. But that doesn't mean it's not possible.
Just a suggestion in my side
Mhm.
yard. We haven't done it yet, but we're planning to plant the sage that, what does it get, 5 or 6 feet tall? And then closer to our house a little bit, and then 5-10 feet back from that, plant an actual tree that is
Mhm.
evergreen. And then you get the protection up high and down low if you're trying to block a large. We
Right.
don't want to see our neighbor's backyard or their porch that's up high on a slab. So.
Exactly. And I'm kind of in the process of doing a similar thing. I've got a couple of the purple sage or cenizo planted kind of close to my drive, but then set back a little bit farther away, I put in a couple small trees. So between the two, I'm hoping to have a little more privacy. I'm not trying to do it with just one.
That combination planting is a great idea. Thanks
Mhm.
for suggesting it, Bethany. And
Yeah, that might work. That would be a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah, because some of the wonderful trees around here, you know, if it's a single trunk tree, then it's not going to give you the privacy you're looking for, but the shrubs can. And there's plenty of shrubs that will be happy in the filtered light of, you know, beneath the tree. That's where they exist.
Okay. I like
Well,
the idea of the sage.
Yeah, and even as Bethany suggested, she moved hers farther forward, I think, in order to get the light that they need.
Mhm,
So it can be done that way too. So that's a great idea.
mhm.
Okay.
You know, if nobody has an additional comment, one thing I'd like to mention, since you were talking about your trimming, Debbie, is first off, just kind of a ballpark date is February 14th. Valentine's Day is generally when people start pruning. Uh, you know, depending on every year, it can change. And the way I prune is I tend to prune the heat-loving plants first, because I know they're not going to start responding to the warming of the weather till later as it gets warmer. Ergo, I don't have new growth developing too quickly at the end of February or 1st of March, when we might have a freeze that could hurt that new growth. Now, let's face it, they're native. They're going to recover anyway, but why put them through it? So I tend to do that. And just as a tip, because whenever we start pruning, we generate so much debris. Let's try not to put it in the landfill. You can use that debris for brush dams if you've got erosion issues on your property, or you can even make a wildlife habitat out of that. All you have to do is go Google brush habitat or brush wildlife habitat, and they'll show you generally how it's built. It's kind of a common sense thing. And I will say, we built a habitat like that at the back of the library near the detention pond. And at first, everybody made fun of me because they said it was a burn pile. It was not a burn pile. It was a wildlife habitat. And it was there a couple of months, and then they called me to the back windows where you could see it. And they came to show me that on that particular day, we probably had 30 cardinals in it. And doggone if it didn't look like a Christmas scene back there. And I with much satisfaction, walked away and basically said, I told you so. It did truly become a wildlife habitat. So keep that in mind. Depending on, if you're in the city, you probably can't do that. But if you have some acreage or whatever, consider, rather than burning it or sending it to the city disposal, or even taking it down to recycling, use it on your own property to your own benefit.
I see we have another question in the chat about trimming Zexmania. So as Susan said, sometimes if the weather's agreeable, I might trim a little bit before the middle of February, but somewhere around the middle of February, and you can trim that Zexmania nearly down to the ground. You'll see where the new little bits of greenery are coming up, but the majority of that, well, everything that was there from last year can pretty much go, and kind of leave it or prepare it for new growth for this year, and it won't get quite as scraggly looking, as if you leave a lot of it. Susan, correct me if I'm wrong, but we tend to trim a lot of these plants down pretty close to the ground, or within 6 inches or so of the ground. I'm trying to think of ones that you specifically don't.
You're absolutely right. If you leave too much of the dead material there, it's just going to be unattractive. And guess what? It's going to rot during the year anyway, and you'll be pulling it out next year when you're doing your pruning. So it can seem a little brutal, but it's not coming. Generally, they're not coming back from those stems. They're coming back from the ground.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say autumn sage is one that is just a little bit different. We trim it down to about a foot off the ground, and just very honestly make a bit of a ball out of it, because it just bursts from that, and you have very good shape the rest of the year as a result of that. But it does that's a particular plant that needs pruning at least twice more during the year. And while we're talking about pruning, we haven't mentioned trees, but let's face it, you're supposed to prune trees on the hottest day of the year, the coldest day of the year, just because some people don't know the difference between an oak and an elm, and may not be out there spraying, with a little bit of paint. But in order to make sure the oak wilt stays in recession, it is the best idea to prune on either the hottest day of the year or the coldest day of the year. And I think that's tomorrow. If anybody wants to get out there. But this is actually a good time of year to prune your trees. But just as a reminder, everybody, even though it is the coldest day of the year, just because of the oak wilt problem, if you're on an oak, please be sure to, treat that cut and make sure it's just a little bit of the, spray paint up there, and you'll save yourself a lot of problem.
Right. And I have a shrub that I've had at my property for a few years now that I've just really started loving so much. It's Flamacanthus, and it gets very big and droopy by the end of the year. And I just remember last year, my daughter happened to be here when I was cutting it back, and it looked like I was being awfully brutal to it. She said, "What did that shrub ever do to you?" This is what I got to do with it. And it really does need to get, even something as big a shrub as that, I do cut it back to probably, I don't know, a foot or so off the ground, because I know how big it's going to get by the middle of the summer. But that's one of those that if you've got the space for it, goodness, I don't think there's a day that it's not covered in butterflies and hummingbirds. It just takes a bit of space, unless you keep it pretty well trimmed. But yeah, a lot of those plants do benefit from a good trimming back, so they stay manageable and pretty.
It's what I call tough love.
Exactly. Yeah.
Make your life easier. If you're going to cut it, let's cut it once and get it back,
Get it done.
very reasonably, and not have to come back in 2 months and, oh, that needs more pruning.
Yeah. Trying to think if there's anything else that we've missed, Susan. Thank you for bringing up the tree trimming, though. That's, yeah.
Yeah, that's very important this time of year.
Important advice. Yeah.
And plus, a lot of the trees have their leaves down, and you can see what the darn thing looks like. And what you thought was a problem limb maybe isn't, and maybe there's a problem limb there that you didn't even realize. So it's just a really good time. And that's actually, by the way, what I'm building my brush habitats out of is is tree limbs, etc., because it needs to be pretty big material.
Yeah. And yes, also good advice. We did some trimming of ash junipers and decided that those branches were perfect for stabilizing a hillside. So we just kind of built some terraces out of it, and hopefully it will slowly decompose. But in the meantime, I'm getting nice grasses that come up along that hillside to help stabilize it. So all of those trimmings are useful.
I did open up the chat, and I see, the question on Zexmania. And so that triggers the thought to remind everybody that just as Debbie said, these caterpillars are going to eat their host plant. But just because that plant has lost every single leaf on there because of a particular caterpillar, when you're talking about a native plant, it's going to recover, even though it is perhaps in the heat of summer. Just give it some water and it will regrow those leaves. Don't think it's a goner. They've worked this out over the millennium. And that bug isn't going to kill it, and it's not going to kill the bug.
Nope. And if you really like to see wildlife in your yard, in your landscape, that's the way to do it. You've got to accept the insects.
Well, if there's no other questions, and Debbie and Susan, if y'all can't think of anything else, we just want to thank y'all. That was very good. Gives us hope for warmer days to come and
Exactly. Something to look forward to.
something to do tomorrow if you're still trapped in your house. Go trim your trees. So
Mhm.
I did want to, since y'all are all gardening, outdoorsy type of folk, I wanted to let y'all know that next week on Wednesday the 9th in the afternoon, we're going to have a program at the library by Dr. I believe you pronounce his name Apple from Texas A&M University, perhaps Appel, I'm not sure. And he's going to be speaking about oak wilt, and that is online and in person. And then at 3 o'clock, Craig Hensley, who used to be our park ranger here, is going to be speaking about wildlife and gardening. And then on the 10th, that evening at 5:30, we're going to have a monarch program. And on the 11th, at 1 o'clock, I believe, sometime that day, too many different things, we're going to have a program about growing roses at the library. So lots of good gardening things coming up. So y'all check them all out. Thanks
Wonderful.
again, Debbie. Let's see, we have some
Thanks,
more
Bethany.
messages.
Oh, yeah, I see a couple things and
Oh, they're just
appreciate
saying thank
y'all.
y'all. Very good.
Yeah. Appreciate y'all for being here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank y'all for the turning around, spur of notice, and doing this online. We appreciate it. So
Well, thank goodness
see
we've
y'all
had
later.
some practice now.
Yes, very good. All right, y'all, stay safe and warm. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.